Welcome to HAWK MOOR, the unofficial history of Dungeons & Dragons, Greyhawk, Blackmoor, Gary Gygax, and Dave Arneson. I am author, researcher, and game designer Kent David Kelly. If you enjoy this video series, please consider buying a PDF or paperback version of my book, HAWK MOOR, Book 1, The Dragon Rises. See the links below in my description of this video. This is Episode 4, Gygax and Gen Con, covering the years 1967 and 1968. From 1967 forward, it would be well to note that there are many wargaming-specific activities and organizations not directly related to Dungeons & Dragons, which Gary was involved in at the time. As a result of these social connections, Gary had a deep awareness of the wants and game preferences of his many wargaming colleagues. He knew that his love of wargaming was shared by many, but most of his fellow gamers were more interested in strategic board games such as chess, shogi, and diplomacy, or in historical military simulations, particularly those involving Napoleonic warfare in World War II. The eccentric people who were interested in miniature figures of the medieval period were still few and far between. Nevertheless, even in the common genres, the historical wargaming community was being challenged by simple realities of distance between individual wargame aficionados. When two or more players of the same game managed to find one another, either locally or through magazines and letters, they would often find that their games were enhanced by a widening of play circles. The more the merrier, quite simply. There never seemed to be enough players for reliable and frequent play. Recognizing these stubbornly omnipresent barriers of geography and obscurity, which were stifling their fun, many wargaming groups reached out to one another to form devoted societies of mutual interest. Other gamers, who were simply too far apart, experimented, often successfully, with play-by-mail scenarios or solitaire variants. Not too bad for legions of gamers dwelling in a lonesome world before our own time of the ubiquitous internet. Despite these innovations, the holy grail for gamers seeking peers, then as now, was a gaming convention. Such get-togethers were still rare in the 1960s due to logistics, money, risk, and the unpredictable numbers of attendees. A poorly attended convention held in the wrong venue, the wrong city, or even just the wrong weather could spell disaster for a tiny hobby society that was dependent upon the members' volunteerism and donations. I am greatly simplifying the history of wargaming in this regard, but from Gary's perspective, the trouble was very clear. There were not enough players for medieval miniature wargamers in specific, and not nearly enough gaming conventions for all wargamers in general. Gary, therefore, was very interested in running his own gaming convention, but he was wisely trepidatious about the entire behavior. Eventually, Gary's interest in Wisconsin gaming con's potential won out over his caution. In the summer of 1967, almost certainly in August, about a month after the publication of the first serial section of The Siege of Bodenberg, Gary arranged an experimental weekend get-together at his own house by inviting his friends and fellow gamers. He invited about 20 people, and all of them were interested and all leapt at the opportunity. To the disorganized gamers of Lake Geneva, Gary's call was very simple. He just said, "Come play," and play they did. For this event, Gary prepared a map of the city of Stalingrad. He converted his dining table, for the delight of the players, into a World War II-inspired urban wasteland, while Fletcher Pratt's famous naval war game was played in the living room. Gary particularly enjoyed this latter game. It did not feature toy soldiers, but it did involve miniature 1/1200 scale warships crafted by Superior Miniatures. Card tables for more gaming were set up on the front porch as well. This event at Gary's house, while chaotic, was a complete success. He variably recalled that between 12 and 20 people showed up to enjoy the festivities. As he wryly commented much later, everybody but my then wife loved it. And as Scott Duncan recalls, hearing from Gary later on, much to his wife's merry chagrin probably, because I think there were like 20 people that crashed their house, and it wasn't a very big house, and he already had 4 or 5 kids by then, so there were like 7 people in this house in, I think, 3 bedrooms, so there were people all over the floor in his living room, as I recall him telling me. The games probably began on a Saturday and went well into the weekend, because Gary once noted that half of the invited players, quote, spent the night there in their sleeping bags. Word of mouth spread in the months to come, and Gary was provided with a vital proof of concept. Wargamers near and far would indeed gather in considerable numbers in Lake Geneva, eager to meet, socialize, and play their favorite games. Fewer than 24 people came over to Gary's house for that very first experimental con, but they did come, and that was the important thing. And what if, as Gary later wondered, the only limitation to having twice or even 3 times as many wargamers show up to play was simply the question of meeting space? This self-inquiry demanded exploration. And so, with the backing of his gaming organization, the International Federation of Wargaming, or the IFW, and several friends, Gary then decided that he would plan his own big gaming convention for the following summer of 1968. This time, however, the games would not be held at Gary's house. This would be a real convention, perhaps even an event, which might receive some national attention. Therefore, the Lake Geneva War Games Convention, Incarnation Number 1, came into being. To this day, and by another name, it is one of the most famous gaming cons in the world of all time. Gen Con, thus, was well and truly born. For some attendees of what was now known as Gen Con 0, Gen Con 1 began in much the same manner. As Gary's wife Mary Jo once recalled, all the attendees that year who slept on our living room floor, those that didn't game all night in our house, woke up our baby, Cindy, several times. Beyond this veteran group crashing over at Gary's house, one of the neophyte attendees of this Gen Con 1, a name the convention only received in retrospect, was the game designer and future TSR employee named Mike Carr, who today shares the honorable distinction of being the only person in the world who has attended every single Gen Con over the last 40-plus years. Mike Carr had seen an ad for the con in the IFW magazine, and he had talked to Gary by letter as well, and so he convinced his own family to take a brief vacation in Lake Geneva so that he could attend Gen Con. As Mike once explained in an interview, to quote, "My original first time attending the Gen Con convention was on a family vacation. I was in high school, and I said to my parents, you know, they're having this gaming thing in Lake Geneva. It's only 300 miles from the Twin Cities. Can we maybe go down there? I'd like to go to this thing. It's on a Saturday. Oh, and by the way, Lake Geneva's got a great setting with boat cruises." Fortunately, bless their hearts, my parents agreed, and off we went. Attending the event was apparently great fun. Running it, however, simply involved an extraordinary amount of work. Gary, in turn, once wrote, rather formally in recollection, that he ran the event on behalf of the International Federation of Wargaming, of which I was an officer. For the first and now legendary convention hall gathering, he managed to rent out the Horticultural Hall, a beautiful site very close to his home. This hall had been built by the esteemed architectural firm Spencer and Powers for the Lake Geneva Horticultural Society in 1911. It was meant for social events in which gardeners would showcase their talents. Gary and Company rented the 50-foot-long hall for one day, August 24th, for the princely sum of $50, as much as he and the IFW could afford at the time. Incidentally, recently that same space was running for about $825 to $1,700 for one weekend day, depending on the wedding season. At that time, Gary was working as a supervising underwriter and risk assessor for the Fireman's Fund America Insurance Company of Chicago, and this was not a small measure of his personal funds. He therefore chose to plan the Gen Con convention for that single day, that Saturday, August 24th, seemed the most likely to attract a large crowd. Hoping to get at least 50 attendees, he set the entrance fee at $1. Perhaps, he hoped, he might come close to breaking even. No refreshments were provided, simply because there were not enough people to do the work. He set up the tables and chairs that Friday night, apparently with the assistance of then IFW president Leonard Lakofka, and then he went to bed and hoped for the best. Interested gamers started showing up on the premises later that Friday night. Due to being a well-loved resort town frequented by tourists, summer prices for food and lodging in Lake Geneva were, then as now, quite high. People who could not afford to stay in a hotel camped nearby while waiting for the games to begin on Saturday morning. That following fateful day, people flooded into the cramped horticultural hall to play their miniature games of choice. There were dozens of attendees, ranging from hardcore wargamers to bored curiosity seekers. The event attracted about 100 people, Gary would later fondly remember, only half of whom were gamers. Fletcher Pratt's naval game was again popular, as were games for Napoleonics and the battles of World War I. Mike Carr's classic game Fight for the Skies, also known now as Dawn Patrol, featured exciting dogfights with Fokkers and Sopwith Camel biplanes. Observer and journalist Ray Pye, writing for the Beloit Daily News, regarded the attendees as, quote, a group of well-mannered, well-dressed, and well-behaved intellectuals who find the reenactment of all the world's battles a fascinating pastime. This is also when and where Gary taught Len Lakofka how to play everyone's favorite proto-RPG strategy game, Diplomacy. Len was deeply impressed at this and would buy his own game set in Chicago that Christmas season. He would also found the long-running diplomacy fanzine Liaisons Dangereuses, which means dangerous liaisons, to record his playgroup's machinations. Gary would later wryly admit that he was indeed, quote, at least partially responsible for foisting Len Lakofka upon an unsuspecting wargaming hobby some years back. Len would return the favor in later decades, appearing many times in the pages of Dragon magazine as the masterful mage and sage Leomund, and his Lendor Isles campaign, the L modules, would provide material for several dungeon module adventures and many Gods of Greyhawk as well. But considering Gen Con 1968, people were having fun, making lasting friendships, and stranger things were occurring along the sidelines. One small group, who labeled themselves the Neo-Numenorians, was even devoted to Tolkien gaming. But the most entrancing game of all during that first con would be none other than the Siege of Bodenberg. Saturday overall was a grand success, and the con broke even from a monetary perspective. Many of the gamers then scattered, bearing priceless positive word of mouth away to their homes, families, and friends. Most of these gamers were perfectly content with the way the day had gone. Gary, however, either by savvy design or by simple accident, had picked the perfect day to rent the horticultural hall. He was responsible for his own cleanup and would likely be charged extra if he did not do a good job. So he told many of the gamers to come back on Sunday for some cleaning, by which he really meant more surreptitious fun and gaming. One intrepid volunteer was stationed at the front door with a broom, looking workmanlike. Everyone else, with admission for the unofficial bonus day completely waived, secretly snuck inside to play some more games. 2 glorious spans of gaming for the price of one. One particularly devout wargamer by the name of Jerry White had driven all the way from Oregon to show off his favorite game to this Wisconsin gathering. The siege of Bodenberg was set up, and Gary had a chance to see the skirmish rules in actual play with Hauser toy soldiers. He was spellbound by the model castle and Jerry's own small collection of the expensive elastoline soldier figures. I became enamored with them, Gary would fondly recall. Seeing the 1-to-1 scale skirmishes enacted in miniature, with each figure representing a single man fighting for his life, hacking with a broadsword, firing arrows over the battlements, suffering grievous wounds, and fighting on, a light bulb went off in Gary's head. The imagined game had been quite something when he was reading the rules, but the actual game, seen firsthand, was simply amazing. This, to his mind, represented the cinematic, hands-on future of wargames. Back home, exhausted after his experience with Bonus Sunday, Gary had time to reflect on the event and the many games that he had seen. The siege of Bodenberg, especially, with its painted miniatures and simulated melees, very likely made his early Gettysburg games seem like a poor imitation of the real thing. Therefore, he began seeking these ever-elusive elastoline miniatures which he had gotten to touch and play with in Jerry's game. He even ran a few ads after that, seeking to purchase such figures later in 1968, and it seems that he would still be seeking a Hauser collector by the spring of 1969. While he was waiting to purchase such a collection, Gary was busy expanding his wargaming hobby in other ways. During late 1968, or, according to some sources, early in 1969, Gary and his buddy Don Kay pooled together their meager monies to buy some raw materials: 6-foot by 10-foot plywood sheets, nails, green paint, wood glue, and bulky bags of sand. They dragged this sundry heap of goods down into Gary's basement, and, much to the chagrin of Gary's beleaguered wife, Mary, the two men built a huge sand table for their own upcoming war games. Behold, Gen Con Eternal Basement Edition. All war games, all the time. Some assembly required. The table was a hardcore carpentry project, but Don and Gary managed to see this task through to the end. When it was done, the boxed-in piles of sand could be sculpted to form terrain, and an extra plywood sheet served as a tabletop cover so that the sand surface could be hidden whenever a more staid and level surface was required. When the sand table was fully tested and his good wife either dodged or appeased, Gary and also Don invited a mutual acquaintance by the name of Jeff Perrin up from Rockford, Illinois. Jeff was not only a medieval wargamer and an all-around good guy, he also possessed an epic elastoline toy figure army. Mr. Perrin was kind enough to drive the 50 miles up to Lake Geneva, bringing his precious figures and a few pages of custom Siege of Bodenberg and Tony Bath-inspired medieval wargaming rules in tow. Rob Kuntz was there and has said that Perrin's rules comprised merely 4 mimeographed pages that had blank backs. These meager yet seminal notes would soon, by many steps, become the core of Gary's and Jeff's later collaborative medieval game Chainmail, and so they are the grandfatherly seeds to Dungeons & Dragons as well. The medieval games played down on Gary's and Don's sand table, which had formerly been used for Tractic-style armor wargaming, were intense and amusing. The skirmish rules got better with every gaming session as various tactics and formations were tried. Playing with Jeff Perrin showed Gary and Don that, quote, one figure to one fighting man rules were not only engaging, they were highly malleable. The removal of all large-scale military unit preconceptions in favor of these knightly figures did not just eliminate the visually uninspiring cardboard counters of wargames. Instead, it also removed a layer of abstraction from the action of the game. These Jeff Perrin and Gary Gygax toy soldier games might soon be frowned upon by hardcore simulationists, but they would appeal to the more imaginative and creative players of all ages. The creation of Gary's and Don's Sand Table would usher in a new era of interested wargamers and increasing presence in medieval wargaming overall. Two of the most important people Gary would soon meet would be Rob Kuntz and also Dave Arneson. We will discuss these adventures with new friends in our next episode of HAWK MOOR. Thank you for watching. Until then, enjoy your old school gaming with family and friends. I will see you soon. Take care.